Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's EBC. We're in Moorhead, Minnesota again this week, and we're at this Replica Stave church thinking about John 6 verses 51 to 58. Now, if you've ever been to Moorhead and you've seen this church, you know that it's a replica of a Stave church that existed in the 12th century in Vik, Norway, and they've made it look just the same. But I want to be using this church today to be thinking about something about symbolism and the way in which we think about what is real, what is literal, and then what is just trying to teach us something. So here's my first existential question of the moment, which is, if this is a replica church, is it a church? Or is it just a replica of a church? Now, hold on to that question for just a moment while we think about John 6, because in John 6, Jesus is still in this bread of life discourse that he's having. And remember, we started all of this discourse with the crowd being sort of troubled because Jesus had said that he had come down from heaven. And then everyone gets troubled and says, wait a minute, what do you mean you came down from heaven? Give us a sign for that. And it's a moment where the crowd is taking something literal, something that actually really literally did happen, and not quite catching on. But then Jesus continues by using these metaphors about bread of life, and then in this passage that we're looking at, really focusing on the idea of Jesus giving his flesh and giving his blood, and that if you're going to believe in Jesus, you have to eat of his flesh and drink of his blood. And now the crowd is sort of really focused on something that's figurative and taking it very literally. Like, what do you mean? How would we eat of his flesh? It's a very hard lesson. And next week, actually, just as a preview, we're going to look at what happens when people have difficulty with this lesson. But it's important to be thinking about this lesson, not from the standpoint of, obviously, we're not talking about literally eating flesh and drinking blood. But in case you're wondering, by the way, this is something that hangs us up a bunch, because when you think about communion, for about as long as this church, the real one in Norway, has existed, about 800 years, there's been a whole discussion about whether or not when we have communion, whether or not we're actually eating and drinking Jesus, whether the bread and the wine actually literally transforms, right? That would be one idea. And then the other idea is whether or not it's just symbolism, whether or not it's Jesus being present in. And there's names for all of these things, and we're not going to get into that whole big discussion, but it's another instance in which people really get hung up in sort of the what is real, what is literal, and then what is the symbolism about what we're doing. When you get hung up in all those things, you miss the rest of the important part of this lesson, which is that by believing in Jesus, you have eternal life. By eating of his flesh, you have eternal life. And it's not about that literal moment. It's about the fact that Jesus gives his whole body, dies for us on the cross, so that we can have that eternal life. Right? So, back to the question that we started with. Is this just a symbol of a church? Or is this a church? Well, depends on what you think a church is. We know that because we come to all of these places and we talk about God everywhere in our everyday lives, that he is everywhere. And so if to you, a church is a place where God is, then even if this is just a replica of a 12th century church, this is a church. And we know God is with us. So everyone, have a great week and think about God being with you everywhere.